Start.
Dear participants, the theme of our next session for today is Sender Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and Biological Pandemic Strategy. I'm pleased to announce that today we have with us Professor Anil K. Gupta, who is professor in National Institute of Disaster Management. Sir is formerly head or director, Institute of Environment and Development Studies, Bundelkhand University, Jhansi. A disaster mitigation and crisis management professional, he possesses interdisciplinary expertise with institutional development, administration, and management. Coordinated several international and national projects, over 100 publications, including many books and research papers. His special contributions were in preparation of National Disaster Management Plan, National HR Plan for DRM, Perspective Plan for an IDM strengthening, Strategy on Climate Change, and Chemical Disasters. He is associated with many international governing bodies, including UNEP, UNDP, UNESCO, and World Bank, etc. Professor Gupta is coordinator of Technical Advisory Committee of NIDM, member of Governing Council and Academic Research Advisory of several institutions and high-level or ministerial delegation abroad. On behalf of FDP organizing team, I welcome you, sir. Educate us with your words.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yeah. Just tell me how to share the PPT.
Sir, left from left third button. Share content.
Ji. Now I can see. Yes.
Okay.
और लोग खत्म ही नहीं किया ये कौन बनाएगा
Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay. Thank you. So thank you for inviting me for this important discussion. And in fact, now we are moving towards a kind of a new strategy for the entire range of governance and developmental practices. So this FDP being organized by the Indraprastha University is really a welcome move. Also experimenting this through an online strategy, which is going to be a very successful approach for the future as well. As we are witnessing a global pandemic, and the issues related with the global policies, its linkage with the national policies and national initiatives are also important, because this pandemic represents a kind of a real scenario of a global challenge. If we look at this picture shows about the evolution of disaster risk reduction strategies globally. So before 90s, we had that we call it some kind of a very ad hoc approach of disaster risk management. And it was 90s when it was an international decade for natural disaster reduction. It was a 10 years period, UN-led initiative, and there the initial thought was kind of a stop disasters. Like people were trying to use engineering-centric interventions to reduce the disasters. Then came a thinking of the social dimensions and the softer aspects of humanitarian issues. So it was a kind of a blend of this thing. But by the end of that decade itself, it was realized that there are some more important dimensions which are in fact the real drivers of disaster risk. And those are, for example, the environmental degradation that leads to vulnerability, and that also leads to increasing disaster risk. And in between, then after 5 years, it was the Yokohama strategy that brought about a global shift in the thought process, that we cannot really stop disasters, but we have to reduce the disaster risk, and also if disaster happens, we have to try to work to reduce the impact. So this was a new thinking. By 2000, the International Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction was in a kind of a global policy initiative, and that also took the form of an institution at the global level. And for 10 years, from 2005 to 15, we had Hyogo Framework for Action. There, the priority 4 was addressing underlying causes of disaster risk and vulnerability. It's very interesting that the priority 4 of the Hyogo has become priority 1 of 2015 to 30. That is Sendai Framework for DRR. And now, how it is going to relate to the current pandemic, I would be discussing with some useful examples also. So, if we look at these 4 priorities of the Sendai framework for DRR, which are visible here, so you will find that the first one, some people may certainly laugh at this because when we say that we are working for almost 30 years or 40 years in the area of disaster risk reduction or disaster management, and when we say that now the priority 1 is understanding disaster risk, it means after 40 years also, we have not been able to understand the disaster risk. But yes, this is the reality, and this is also the critical issue, that until unless we really have the ability and we have really understood the disaster risk, then we can reduce the disaster risk. We can reduce the disaster really very successfully. And for this, it is required that we strengthen the disaster risk governance. Then our investment has to be directed and redirected towards disaster risk reduction, then enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better. This is also important thing, that when there are damages, we should not recreate the risk. So new development should be better in the sense that that should reduce the risk. I think there is some problem with the Bluetooth. Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
So I'm now without Bluetooth because some problem was there.
Okay.
So anyway, national and local level initiatives and global and regional level initiatives. So quickly moving to this Sendai framework has 4 priorities and then a set of 7 targets. Targets are basically to address the priorities. So 4 are to reduce and 3 are to increase. What are we aiming to reduce? We are aiming to reduce our global disaster mortality. Mortality is about death. And this directly relates with the current pandemic, because a number of disasters that can lead to a specific number of mortality, that scenario is being presented by this single disaster, because this has a global coverage. It's had engulfed more than 135 countries of the world. A huge amount of people are affected, because the people who have been affected by the coronavirus are directly impacted, but the people associated with them, their peers, their family people, the people in their living in their habitat, all are directly or indirectly affected. Then because of the lockdown, in fact, everyone is affected. So this is very important. Then economic loss in relation to GDP. After 30 years of efforts in disaster risk reduction, there is a great shift. Now you will find that if we leave aside this particular pandemic, but start focusing on the previous major flooding, major cyclones, and even earthquakes also, the number of people killed by such disasters are going down, disaster by disaster. Whereas on the other hand, the losses because of these disasters are increasing. So that is now a new concern, that since the economic losses are there, the losses to biodiversity, losses to ecosystem services, losses to infrastructure, losses to development resources, losses to people's livelihood, that is more. So we have to focus our strategies to address such kind of issues. Then damage to critical infrastructure. For example, the failure of a power plant, failure of a water supply system, These kind of issues are emerging as a more important thing, which disrupt the entire developmental systems for some time and brings everything to halt because of damage to critical systems. But on the other hand, what we need to increase? We need to increase the number of countries with national and local DRR strategies. For example, India's disaster management plan, national disaster management plan, is aligned to Sendai framework for DRR that was first released in 2016, now updated in 2019. Then international cooperation to developing countries, very, very important. There are smaller countries, there are least development countries, there are island states, there are small hilly countries, and they need support from other countries to enable disaster risk reduction. Then availability and access of early warning system and DRR information. Without effective early warning, the disaster risk reduction is not possible. Disaster management is not possible. We have been able to manage successfully major catastrophic cyclones also, because now we have a lead time of 5-6 days of forewarning in managing cyclones. Now coming to global health initiatives beside Sendai framework for DRR, which are almost on the lines or are related with the Sendai framework for DRR. So while Sendai framework for DRR in its preamble itself has focused very specifically on improving health infrastructure to help reduce the risk of disasters and the impact of disasters, and taking a lead from the Sendai framework for action, the global agencies, including the WHO, World Health Organization, has developed a strategic framework for emergency preparedness that was released in 2017. Then there is also a WHO research and development blueprint for action to prevent epidemics, a global strategy and preparedness plan. This directly addresses the risk of epidemics and pandemic as well, and the management of this pandemic. All the guidelines being issued by WHO are relating to this blueprint also. Then international health regulations. There is an international policy, international law on health regulations. So monitoring and evaluation framework, so that puts into all the national initiatives a monitoring framework that what is there in the place and what needs to done for improving the health resilience and adaptation for future risk of health related issues, including pandemics. Then 13th general program of work, this is called GPW 13, effective from 2019 to 23. So that covers epidemics, pandemics, conflict, natural and technological disasters. It also covers the resistance towards towards antibiotics and all such kind of things. Then the World Association of Disasters and Emergency Medicine, then International Association of National Public Health Institutes, that started in 2006, then International Federation of Environmental Health. This is very important for us because we are the environment fraternity, and now we are discussing about disasters and also discussing about the health issues. So a kind of a blend of these three issues, this international federation brings all the three dimensions into one umbrella and looks health challenges or health emergencies from environment and disaster point of view. The national health emergency programs, which are supported by a well-resourced and efficient WHO, like India also have a WHO India. So WHO India supports Government of India, all its health program by providing technical and other kind of resources also, working very, very closely. Then International Council of Nurses. This is also a very important organization because we know that in the health system, so the role of nurses are very important. So this agency also develops guidelines about nursing and midwifery and the kind of other supports during the pandemic and epidemic challenges also. Now looking at the COVID-19 Emergency Committee initiative, so 5 dimensions of recommendations have come, and that is directly for managing this COVID-19 pandemic. So 5 dimensions which are internationally developed as a kind of a protocol. These 5 are surveillance and monitoring, then containment and control, then saving lives, then community resilience, and then security and stability. And you might have witnessed that in managing this COVID-19, we had to have all 5 dimensions mentioned here into our strategy. we had focused on surveillance and monitoring that included even the surveillance and the transport entry points are in public also, then testing, then digital monitoring and reporting, then the strategy of social distancing or containments or the hotspot zones. These kind of things were there. Then the hospital facilities to saving the life of the people and saving the life of the health workers as well. Then inventory, then working very fast towards developing a vaccine also, and also looking at the alternative strategies, for example, utilizing the potentials of Ayush and other things. Then community resilience, it's very very important dimension for managing any epidemic, and particularly when it is of the size of a pandemic. That how we protect the vulnerable people. For example, there were specific regulations and specific guidelines for the people of the age more than 50 and more than 65, and also about the children, the people with comorbidity, people with other kind of vulnerabilities, pregnant women, lactating women. So these kind of things are also important. Then security and stability. So how to ensure that the life goes on, how to ensure that this society goes on. So supply of essential services, income. Now we are talking of opening the businesses also. Then revival of economy, housing and society stability. Then, for example, the prisons are these kind of containments, police and army, where people were in close proximity to each other, and also working in a greater risk of infection. So we had to adopt specific means. Very interesting slide. This is that after the Sendai framework has been developed, there was a monitoring framework designed for Sendai framework, and after the WHO protocol came up in 2017, so WHO suggested some modifications to Sendai framework in the form of epidemics risk index. And epidemics risk index, you will see that there are three major dimensions: hazards and exposure, vulnerability, and lack of coping capacity. And it's very interesting. I was looking at this today only, and I found that whatever means we are applying to manage this pandemic are very, very directly replicating this epidemics risk index. For example, that how that can spread, and how the spread can be contained. For example, the negative side, the person to person transmission, and the positive side, for example, the wash facilities and all this. And that vulnerability, that who are the people, what are the sections of society who are more vulnerable, who can catch the infection, and even when they catch the infection they can fall sick, and there is chances of mortality. And then looking at the governance, health infrastructure, and the health resources as well. Now, if we look at this picture, that though this pandemic has come in 2019 December, and we call it COVID-19, the concept of and the issues for dealing pandemic. This is if you look at the reference, that is 2017. So the issues about pandemic has already been researched and has been reported, and also the strategy for dealing with pandemic was already there in our literature and the policy domains. These are the four broad components of health resilience. So if we are focusing on health disaster risk reduction, so health disaster preparedness, and social determinants of health also important. Then health emergency program. So this is very important, whereas where we also witness that in India, we are weaker while we talk about health resources and health facilities as compared to the developed countries. But if we look at the impact and how we try to manage it, our efforts and our outcomes are comparable with, are even better than the countries where the health infrastructure and facilities were much better than us. So there are other dimensions which include strong coordination platforms also. So even when you have lesser facilities, how effectively you use and how effectively you mobilize alternative and emergency resources, that is also important. Then health system recovery. There are also chances that the health system gets disrupted. For example, recently we faced a major cyclone, And now we are facing some floods also in some other parts of the country. We also face a severe heat wave condition also in our country. We also faced some industrial mishaps during the lockdown period. So there were multiple disasters being faced at the same time. So there were also risk of disruption of the health facilities and health services. So how fast we revive and bring back the normals in the health system, that is also equally important. And beside this, health is not only the hospital facility. Health is public health. That is a very important component. And when we say public health, so community plays a great role. So health prevention protocols and health prevention practices by the people themselves, whether at the individual level, whether at the family level, whether at the organization level, that also plays a great role. Now coming to the containment measures of COVID-19, although these are very well known and very well reported, even media was showing also showing a lot. But what is important here? What is the effort? The effort is basically we are trying to lower the peak. So that is important. So if we feel that we will not be able to lower the peak, so that is the scenario where the infrastructure will be the capacity of the infrastructure will be exceeded, and this overwhelming situation would be really a great challenge. So the efforts of all the governments all over the world is to lower down the peak. So that is important, even if we have the number of cases, but and on a long term basis, and the health infrastructure and health system can support for a longer duration treating those patients, providing advisory, providing testing facilities. This we can think of that now we have started saying that live with corona. So how to live with corona? That important that peak should not be very high. Then only we can think of live with corona, so that our health systems can continue supporting the medical and treatment facilities. Now, we are talking of the economic damage also that because of the pandemic, and this picture shows the economic damage caused by various pandemics and various infectious diseases globally till 2017. And the projections show that this COVID-19 is going to far exceed this data. And as SARS and HINI are at the top, that those were the highest score for economic damage. I think this pandemic is going to far exceed, and therefore the measures for recovering and reviving the economy has have also to be taken very seriously, and that is the reason Government of India has recently announced a Atmanirbhar package, an Atmanirbhar strategy for enabling India's own local self-reliance in terms of business, in terms of management, in terms of sustainable development as well. Now, coming quickly to these things that when it comes to pandemics, so pandemics are also not new. For example, the disasters are also not new to this world. Pandemics were taking place, disasters were also taking place. There was cases of Spanish flu, plague. In the past, there were a very severe and serious level of pandemics also faced by the humanity. And epidemics are also common. This time it is the size of this pandemic is very large. More than 135 countries are engulfed. That is a serious issue. And India is not different. India is also affected, but India is certainly different in certain specific dimensions. Now, since we are environment fraternity, I would like to quote here that it has a direct connection with environment and ecosystems also. For example, the origin of this itself is associated with the natural gene stock. A disruption or the kind of intrusion with the natural gene stock or the wild gene stock. There are also the doubts about the bioweapon research that this virus has escaped. So there are thought process about those also. But coming to India, why India is different? India is a large population. That makes it very different from the developed countries. India has a significant level of poverty. We also have migrant populations. I'm not talking of international migrants, but I am talking of internal migration. And internal migration is always related with the term that we use, environmental refugee or the climate refugee. Because of the natural disasters or the climate driven stresses, a huge number of people migrate from rural areas to the urban areas for want of better livelihood, for want of jobs, and that we have recently witnessed over the past 1 month or so. And India is also a place of almost all kind of disasters. India is a multi-hazard disaster country. We are also the climate impact hotspot, and India is also a host of a number of cultures, a varying culture. Every 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, you will find cultural shifts and cultural changes. So one norm probably does not work, because when there is a cultural difference or cultural variations, there are the occasions also. For example, the large congregations, rallies, festivals, so many things are there. So those were also posing some kind of challenges also in managing the pandemic in India. Then India is different in a way that we had some foresight, and looking at the global scenario, we had the lockdown very timely and also in a graded way. Now we are going to have unlocking strategy. We also had travel restrictions, but yes, there were some kind of issues where we find that there were possibility of betterments also, improvements also. For example, delays in international travel restrictions are there were issues of mass gathering, rallies, mass crowding, or the migrant labor issues also. Then coming to the pre and post COVID-19 issue, then again we have to have to draw the key lessons in improving our systems, particularly the health system. And this is also an opportunity that in India, in past year 2019 itself, we launched National Climate Change Mission on Health. Earlier, we did not have had a dedicated mission on climate change and health. So now that is an opportunity that we draw the lessons of this pandemic and try to improve our health system nationally, but with clear focus on the local level. Then India is also suffering a lot because of the business dependency on the imports from various countries. For example, China itself was a major exporter to India. India was buying a huge amount of things from China, and the disruption in China also affected India's businesses, and that has affected the entire society. So these kind of things are also there. Then industry, we also witness industrial accident during this period. So how far we are able to implement the safety and environmental laws? So there are questions about that also. This is also a important lesson. Then again, India is different. Safety culture, we talk a lot about safety, we talk a lot about environment, but when it comes to safety culture, really at individual level, really at household level, really at organization level, sometimes the ground reality is different. So we have to really revisit, and this pandemic is giving a lesson that if we really do not bring the safety culture into our life, it would be a great challenge in our survival and sustainability. So that has to be thought. Then agriculture forms major part of economic development and public transaction. Although in GDP, the agriculture is not a great share, but in the life of the people, agriculture is a great share. But because agriculture is not one sector, but it is also a supporter of a number of major, in a number of other sectors as well. And there are several businesses, several activities which are dependent on agriculture related activities. Then coming to the top 10 most likely fallout in the world. So prolonged recession of the global economy. Now globally, this is a most important worry, and the worry is continuing. Not the worry is not recent, but it is continuing for past 20 years. And most of the people are associating the global fallout in economy only to pandemic. But I would like to say that we need to have a broad vision and a broad understanding. COVID-19 has brought a disruption, but we should also realize that the global economic growth was not at high pace. There is global economic recession was continuing for past 20 years or so. And if we go back to the 2005 Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, we will find that it was already given indication that the global ecological slowdown will lead to global economic slowdown. So that also need to be looked from that point of view, because this pandemic has also helped in reviving our ecosystem pristinity and ecosystem purity. So how we are going to look into the balancing these things, then looking to practices which will also have environmental repercussions. For example, now the major change in the business systems, major change in industrial systems are going to take place. For example, there was a discussion that a number of industries which were operating in China are likely to move to India. I have a question, that are we seriously scrutinizing those industries which are now looking at India, that to make sure that those are not the dirty industries, those will not the environmental damaging production systems in India, and will again cause disruptions in our environmental systems and will cause the further ecological slowdown. For example, now the most important focus that is coming on in the post COVID situation is packaging. Packaging is going to change like anything. For example, and this picture also shows that the most focus of the industry is in on packaging, because the contactless. This is an important buzzword that is not coming. Contactless are the touchless. Now, the five things which companies are also, which industries and businesses are also looking at globally, and we have to look at the environmental life cycle impacts also of those strategies. For example, companies are looking to resolve the current issue, then develop the resilience, then return to normalcy, and whether in return to normalcy, are they going to have additional environmental impacts or additional environmental disruptions as well. For example, during the period of this pandemic also, there was a huge uses of the plastic materials, and the disposals were not point, and it was the plastic materials have been disposed of anywhere on the highways and where the workers were there. But yes, it was required at that time. But how we are going to address this problem? Then the exceeded use of water, then also exceeded use of the chemicals in sanitization. All these things are also to be seen. Then reimagination, that is also important, that when the business systems and industries are going to reimagine the new business strategies, how we make sure that environmental concerns are adequately addressed and reformed. So that is also important, that how new relations between industry, environment, and development are to be established. Now, coming to the Indian scenario, very important dimension that has also environmental repercussions and development repercussions also. If we look at this picture, the states which are most affected, where the most of the cases of the coronavirus are there, these are the states which also have a very high level of development, very high level of industrializations also. And so it is very, very important inference we can draw, that what are the relationship between these things. Northeast are quite safer. So why it is so? Even the states which we sometimes say those are lesser in development, those are the backward states, the cases are lesser. So do we have some kind of inferences to draw for the sustainability as well? Now, the trade impact of coronavirus, they show that India doesn't have a very severe impact, but I would not agree to this, because I often say that past 10 years or so, gradually the concept of GDP is dying. So the reliance on GDP as a measure of development is not correct, because we spend 50 to 70 rupees for a haircut in India, whereas in US, how much we need to spend, many of you might have already witnessed. So GDP is not the real, doesn't show the real picture, and the standard of living doesn't show the real picture of standard of life. So that is also important, and that is the reason Bhutan comes on the top of the living the quality of life. And then disruptions caused by COVID-19 on employment, that is very, very serious. And in fact, the unemployment, the real unemployment scenario, people project what people project, we have not yet witnessed. The unemployment is further going to increase, but it is also bringing shift. The e-based entrepreneurship may increase, but other entrepreneurship, because we need social distancing, we need to curb down the number of employees in the organization. So that will also impact hugely the industries and other sectors. Tourism is affected, hotel industry is affected. And now there is a increased pressure on the villages after the migrant laborers have gone back. So this is also the picture showing job crisis. I'm not going to describe because all the sectors are mentioned here, but it shows a huge impact on jobs. So how it is going to revive, that is a question. And the government of India, although tried to look at this, and the allocations in different sectors have they have tried to match the sector-wise impacts also. Now, this is very important that the past 10 years or so, we were also looking at integrating sustainability and disaster resilience dimensions into businesses. For example, past 4 years before, Tata's in India came with an organization called Leaders for the Nature. So this kind of initiatives are also there. So this disruption to development, disruption to business is also going likely to have impact on the sustainability initiatives, because sustainability initiatives also need monetary support, funding support, R&D supports as well. However, most of the some of the big industries had the business continuity management strategies in place, but more than 75% or 80% industries, especially in India, they do not have any business continuity management strategy. So now we are working with industries, we are working with FICCI, ASSOCHAM, and these kind of organizations, so that we ask all the major industries and MSMEs also to develop a disaster management plan, and also include the environmental emergencies as a very important dimension, because COVID-19 environmental emergency has brought this example that environmental disruption, whether it is health related disruptions or whether heat related disruptions or wind related disruptions, can cause severe damage to industrial operations and industrial businesses also. And then carelessness towards safety and emergency, that what happened in Vishakhapatnam. And now for reopening the industries, now we are talking that in the COVID case, which is going to last next 2-3 years at least, even if we have the vaccine. So we also need to revisit the protocols of safety audit, review ISO and other kind of the protocols. But at the same time, these are also going to give new opportunities with the same goal, new narratives and methods. And in the business system, now there is a term that is called change management. We also have to look at the interlinkages between environmental change and the business change management, so that the sustainability into integration into development can be brought in. Then local self-reliance is also an opportunity that is available with us. For example, now a huge number of migrant laborers and migrant workers are gone back to villages. So we have the human resource available there, but how we best utilize to improve the village ecosystems, to make village ecosystems more self-sustaining. What can be the opportunities that we also need to look at, and within this, for example, now we are talking, we are in dialogue with the various authorities to diversify and to enhance MSPs, and lifting the farm produce from the farmers field itself, looking at the Telangana experience. And also we are looking that, for example, we had the case of Sikkim as an organic state, Nepal also as an organic country. They are trying to develop as an organic country. Can we think of every district and every taluka having few dedicated villages, few villages declared as organic or sustainable agriculture villages, are the green, and looking at green revolution, second green revolution. Can we utilize these new migrant laborers who have came back? Then how do we diversify the rural livelihood with revival of rural industries, diversification, agro ecosystems and processes, etc. Here, although agriculture impact is shown lesser, but as I told earlier, that agriculture is not one sector. It supports a number of sectors. It supports businesses also. It supports all the local economies. Coming to health sector resilience, as I informed you earlier, that India's health sector is very low, has low capacity as compared to the health sector resilience of other countries. So we need to focus, and also focus with a shift. Most of the focus of India in past 50 years in health was clinical practices, that to provide curative solutions. Now we have to move, and we are trying to move past 10 years or so towards public health or the preventive health systems, that provide an opportunity to interlink environment and health relations also. Now we are also trying to focus that health should be integrated into all the sectors, and health sector infrastructure should be resilient to the climate change also, to the disasters also. For example, in Orissa and West Bengal, cyclone has hit a number of health sector facilities, and when health sector facilities are hit, then how to treat the victims, how to treat the people, how to provide the health relief to the people who are affected. So that is also an important concern. Now, occupational health has been a rare focus in India. Whether we are sitting in our offices, we are sitting in the industry, whether we are in the railway station or the public transit areas, occupational health has been really focused as an important concern. So, occupational health and environmental emergencies are also emerging as key issue. For example, recently we are working with CPCB, Central Pollution Control Board, to develop a national crisis management plan to deal with the contamination of water bodies. So this kind of initiatives also we are taking. Then recently we have submitted just before the onset of this pandemic in the month of January, we had submitted the national health resilience and capacity building plan that was developed jointly with the WHO, where we have suggested the improvement at the sub center and the village level, ward level hospitals. And there we are also trying to integrate the alternative medical systems, community medicine, testing, monitoring, and data effectiveness, personal hygiene, for example, looking at Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, how the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan can contribute to Swasth Bharat Abhiyan. So this kind of initiatives and how to take care of elderly and other comorbid cases. Now coming to 2-3 important pictures. I'm not going to talk much, but showing some pictures to tell that this COVID, we have been in lockdown situation for around 2.5 months or 3 months, but it has also given a significant rethinking or a self introspection also, that what kind of development really we want. We want fast development, we want very high level of development, but the development that we have been copying, that we have already seen. We have seen Germany, we have seen France, we have seen USA. So what do we really want? What kind of development can really help us live better? Many of you might have searched in dictionary or in Google. Again, try a search, and if you can find the definition of development. I never found the definition of development. You can find the definition of sustainable development, you can find the definition of economic development or inclusive development, but no one has yet defined development. So that is a question. Kindly try to search, and if you get a definition of development, please do share with me. In past 30 years or 40 years, I never found that anyone really defined development. So that is a question, that it is something after which we are rushing behind, it not yet defined. And this concept, this research of 2017 is very important to refer here. Illusion of growth. So this was a research published in 2017. A group for economics only, they worked out, and they see the title, how economics fail the economy, and the global economic recession is going on. They say the economic principles itself has failed the economy, and the basis of this is ecological slowdown. And look at this picture. This picture shows a contrast. In US, this picture shows that the customer credits are increasing, and on the other hand, their buying capacity or the supporting capacity are declining. So it is representing a dichotomy. The only thing about development that you might have studied in biology, that this is the development. But again here, when we say that we are highly developed, then what is there? It is death. Death is imperative before the new development. So whether these disasters are also signaling that if we do not really redefine our development path, there are catastrophes inevitable. So this is also an important lesson. This picture I found it very useful, very interesting to show. You see from where we started, where we gone, and where now we going. This lockdown has shown us at this stage, and now we are moving towards work from home, work from computers. So this is going to be the kind of a retrogressive evolution. But what is the real solution before us? I will go back to Lord Buddha and his philosophy of middle path. So we have to really see that what really we want, that we say that the future we want. So that we have to see that we need to have a balance between the technology driven, the balance between the spirituality driven, balance between the industry balance and environment. So that also we need to see. And our ancient literature, Indian literature, is rich with these kind of lessons that provides us the description that how we can enable this concept of middle path into our practices of managing development. Then it require this is the last slide. I would come to this, that therefore we require a rethinking our approach of disaster risk reduction and sustainability together. We were rethinking DRR separately and we were rethinking sustainability separately. Now we have to come together and to start rethinking. It's very important. In India, the Prime Minister's Agenda 10 on disaster risk management brings this kind of blend of this, and we need to have a proactive approach to address that late Mahatma Gandhi had said that earth has enough to satisfy the needs of the people but not the needs of the people. So this is very important, that we try to inculcate a sense of accountability in our people, including in children, and we look at the new values and virtues which are now important to live in the post-COVID-19 period also. Thank you very much, and best wishes for happy life. Thank you, thank you, Indraprastha University, Dean USM, and all the faculty for inviting me to share my thoughts. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderful and informative lecture. We all know now that COVID is a disaster. Pandemic and disasters are not new to the world, as well as to India too. But because in India we are having the different conditions, so we need to manage the disasters also from different perspectives, depending upon our requirements. So if there are any questions from the panelists, please ask. Otherwise, I will take the questions of participants.
Ansu, I would like to ask a question.
Please,
Okay,
please.
sir.
Professor Gupta, congratulations for giving such a accomplished, vivid lecture
Thank you.
for the participants and for the panelists. I have a question. Basically, the question is that when this first question is when this peak India will see. Can you elaborate on this? And when we will see the curve flatten? This is the first question. And second question is, you were saying the American dream is over. Now I see some silver lining in this. Do you think there's Indian dream will start?
Both questions are very very important, Professor Gupta. So I will first come to the question number one, that regarding the peak and flattening of the curve. Now, this week itself, what we have seen in past 10 days, we have seen entirely a kind of a very high log phase, and the number of cases are increasing very fast. But yes, I would say that what our health experts are saying, that peak is not yet arrived. Peak is yet to arrive, and it may take even 1 month time or even more, because now we do not have any other option than to open our businesses and activities to some extent, but caution. But we also know our Indian society. The Indian society has lot of diversity. There are people who are law abiding, the people who are having better awareness and understanding, and the other people who are fighting for their bread and butter. Inculcating the culture of safety may take some time. As far as we can bring the safety culture in people, that will help us flatten the curve. So that is fundamental. Each one has to contribute. Then only flattening of curve can be seen. Second thing about the American dream. Yes, this is the reality. People have to realize that the future we want, the life really we want, that we have to start rethinking. Because see, past 30 years, 40 years, we were considering the people having nuclear weapon or the nuclear energy are the most powerful people. And this corona has shown that it is not a big bomb. It is a virus that cannot be seen by the naked eye, can make the entire world economy to collapse. जैसे कहाँ काम आवे सुई कहाँ वो तलवार और सुई वाला एक होता है ना कि you don't need a kind of a bomb for everything. A microorganism has done this. So sometimes a ant can kill an elephant. Ant can make an elephant mad. So these kind of things also. So we need to redefine. And probably this is very challenging time, an important time for the people working in environment, because they are being looked to give us the new path. Environment people has to really work hard to suggest the new path of development.
Thanks a lot.
Can I have a small question? Anshu,
Hanji,
may I
ma'am.
ask?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Gupta sir, please mute yourself. Gupta sir, please mute yourself. And say,
Yes,
Gupta sir, please. Thank you, sir.
Is Dr. Gupta, thank you so much for a very nice lecture. It was really wonderful. I just have a small question because we are talking about, the health emergencies or the health disasters. And when it comes to it, you know that you have already covered a part of it. But when it deals with the poor section, like for the middle class or for the elite class, it is not at all a problem. We can observe all the precautions. But when it comes to the poor people, the poor community, how can we ensure social distancing? They have such small houses, and in that small house, so many people are living together. And then you see the plight of the migrant labor. Everybody is really seeing that. So they are not even getting nourishment. So their immunity and all that is also going down. And even hygienically, they are not going to get all those facilities. So how do you look at it that in the times to come, how this poor community of India, how it is going to follow all the guidelines that have been issued to contain this major pandemic?
Madam, your question is very important. In fact, I was in Gujarat for around 11 days as a part of the central team, and I have witnessed this on the ground. So on the one hand, I was representing government, and on the other hand, I was also looking at the real scenarios. I was seeing the picture people who were even around 16-17%, 15-16% staying in one small room. And
Yes.
when the rooftop was hot, it is a heat season, and since the lockdown was there, so the people who were working in 3 different shifts, all the shift people were there in one room, and in the lockdown they were not allowed to come out. So when some of our colleague asked to policeman that the people who come out and break the lockdown, why don't you beat like UP? They said, sir, how can we beat when we know that their room is so hot that 4-5% cannot stay and there are 15-16%. So this is a real challenge. But now I come to answer. Accepting the risk is also important. We also have to see that gradually we have to reduce the exposure, but at the same time we have to start thinking of living with corona. For example, we say that live with the risk. For example, we say live with the nature. We have a lot of canine animals, we have a lot of dangerous animals also, but in the forest areas also people live. So how we have the resistance mechanism, as you also rightly told, that these people do not have that kind of very good nourishment. But when the people are employed by some organizations or some companies and the public health system, so public health system have to emerge to support their immunity. That is important. So
Yes.
better hygiene, better immunity mobilization and the boost. Now Ayush, if you look at the Ayush, those things are not very costly. Those things are really not very costly, and Ayush has really worked very well. It has even been given to patients also. So because we know that for corona actually there is no treatment. It is only the own immunity that works, own health system that revives, except when they are required additional oxygen or the ventilator support. So first thing, that if we maintain the immunity, if we maintain the hygiene system, And second thing, reduce the number of patients. Even one person is infected, we should make sure the other person is not infected. So those things are there. So using mask and these kind of things are now brought into our culture also. Now I have seen in the even recent advertisement of the dresses also. Now with the dresses, people are offering free masks and very nicely designed masks. So now this is a new culture. This is a new normal that we are entering into. So this is important. We have to show to our weaker sections also. We have to support them. In fact,
Yeah, we have to support them.
we have to support. It is a larger social responsibility also.
And what do you think about the herd immunity? Do you think it is going to develop soon?
See, madam, in the concept, it is there because the herd immunity was a practical thing in the past pandemic. But every time we get with a new experience. So at this moment, no health expert even can say with 100% confidence because again this virus is mutating very fast. So this is also a challenge, and that is also posing question on the vaccine also. For example, if vaccine is effective on the 4 type of strains, but this is developing new strains very fast. So having own self immunity and self care, that is the real mantra that I feel. And then people are strong, people are with strong immunity, then the virus will weaken.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
There is a question from Dr. Mukesh and Dr. Avdesh also. This is regarding to the people who are migrating from urban to rural areas. So as per disaster management, what is the key plan for public health, or what is government doing for them other than MGNREGA scheme?
Yeah, ma'am, that is very important thing. And in fact, the government is trying to review the situation very regularly. But certainly there are variations. Some states, some places, the things are being taken I would say that near adequate. I would not say perfect, but yes, near adequate care has been taken. But at some places there are certain issues also. So both the things are required, the interventions from the government side, but interventions from the person side. See, when the lockdown was there, we have seen the miseries of these laborers also. When the employment was not there, the kind of challenges they're facing. I have seen the situation where they were provided with ration and food very adequately. They were getting daily food, but then also they were facing psychological challenge. They were telling, sir, we are getting food, but it is not only food. But anyhow we have to go back to our family. We have to go back to our home. So that was also a question. So we have to also ensure that each and every person develops a habit. For example, now we were teaching that you need to wash your hands before you eat. So we have to inculcate the culture of mask and everything, and then changing food habit also. For example, our masses had gone to a food habit which were opposed to immunity. Now we have to bring back those people to eat and economically purchasable food items or affordable food items which can boost the immunity. You don't need to really spend all the time a lot of money to, for example, tulsi, for example, adrak, for example, haldi. These are the things which are very common. So one need not to spend too much of money, but only thing one has to bring into practice. So that's important.
Thank you, sir. So there's last question from Mr. Balveer Singh. He's asking, do you think greediness and materialistic approach is the main cause of such type pandemics?
See, greediness and materialistic approach also has various levels. I would say that personal greediness, then the family greediness, then say the urban greediness. For example, I think that my city should have maximum flyovers. Then I think my state should have maximum flyovers. Then my country should have. Then global greediness. Someone thinks that I should have nuclear bomb. So yes, certainly, we have to redefine our path of development. That what is the real development we want? We need to really think. We have examples now. Germany has gone back from nuclear. Now it is going to non-renewable resources, where many of the countries are striving hard to get the nuclear energy. So there are lessons we need to learn from those.
Anshu, I have a very small question. Can I ask?
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. Gupta, I have a very pertinent question related to urban people,
Ji.
urban children particularly, because
Madam,
we
I
are,
can't see you. Madam,
I am not visible because, yeah, let me just try and if I'm, okay, doesn't matter. I'm asking you questions.
Ji.
The urban children, some 5, 6 years back, there was a debate world over going on the impact of the electronic media on the children. And we
Ji.
are now 100% or 200% exposed to the electronic media. And it was said, and especially our children, and it was said that that will lead to many kind of deficit syndromes. Right. So what is going to happen? I think this is very important for us to understand because government and in this pandemic time, we are forced to be on the electronic media 24 into 7.
Ji.
My question, this is another kind of disaster which is happening on the minds of the children particularly. So I would like to have your comments on this.
Madam, yes, this is also important dimension. Otherwise, also, even without COVID, also this was the point in much of the development debates. Here I would say that one slide I had shown about the middle path. So why people are going? Why our children are becoming more and more dependent on electronic media? We need to revisit probably the behavior and kind of accountability and responsibility of other sections in the family also. If that is the only means for them to connect to the people, then certainly that is going to have a severe impact. If it is only for the education purpose, then certainly we can move towards a middle path. For example, you can have certain theory classes through online practices, then you can have face to face practical classes keeping the social distancing norms, so that may be possible. For example, now in schools also we have to open the schools, we have to open the colleges, but how can we curb down the crowd in the classes? So can we think of that, having certain theory classes through online, but certain practical classes face to face, or certain tutorials face to face? So we have to bring a blended approach. We cannot avoid the electronic media, that is the reality of the current time, but we also need to make sure that the physical activities, people going out, but people going out, but what level? Because in Europe there was a culture that people were hugging each other, and people were hugging hugging to the members who were not even known to them. So, and whom do not have any affection, but just for a kind of a social norm, and that has contributed to the spread of infection in Italy. So we have to really see that you meet people really you want to meet, you play with the people really you want to be with them. So that is also the thing. And then family cohesiveness, socializing, all these things are going to help us in curbing down the children dependence on electronic media. So this is my message, that we have to collectively rethink on this.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderful lecture and all the explanations. Our
Thank
next
you.
speaker is waiting, so I'll request Dr. Sumit to please take over the floor.
Yeah,
Sumit,
thank
floor is
you.
yours.
Yes. Thank you,
Thank you.
Dr. Ansu. And thank you, Gupta sir, for giving us such an insightful lecture. So, in the next session, we are having with us a virologist, and his name is Dr. Arun Kumar, and he is going to speak on animal origin of infectious disease pandemics and how can we prevent the catastrophe. Dr. Arun Kumar is a professor and having a field of medical microbiology and virologist who is interested in emerging disease surveillance, epidemiology, and pathogen discovery. Professor of virology and founder and ex-director of Manipal Institute of Virology, Manipal, has made diagnostic virology accessible to public, played a major role in early detection of Nipah virus outbreak in Kerala in 2018, and he was the one who was the first person to connect the Nipah virus and that disease outbreak in Kerala. He has established a state-of-the-art Manipal Institute of Virology laboratory at Manipal University. So, Professor Arun, yeah, just unmute. I am unmuted. So, floor is yours, Professor Arun.
I'm audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. So, can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see.
Thank you, Sumit, for this opportunity. So, uh, so the next few minutes, I will just take you through the animal origin of this pandemic. I know that everybody is interested in COVID, and a lot of things have been talked about COVID. We will come to COVID a little later. I'll just take you through some of the important aspects of this human-animal interaction. I think others can put on mute so that it will be clear. So as you know that in the past few years, or in fact maybe last two decades, we see a lot of new diseases are emerging. In fact, multiple diseases, more than one diseases are emerging in a year. This emergence could be of various types. It could be a known agent, already known microorganism appearing in another area, new area, or it could be a non-agent or a very close relative of the non-agent, like your avian influenza, just jumping into the human and becoming a pathogen in human. Or it could be completely unknown agent, like your SARS virus in 2003, or the SARS virus 2, or COVID-19 in 2020. So these are the three scenarios where you see diseases appearing. This is a study which conducted people have looked at it from the literature from 1940 to 2004. What are the emerging infectious disease events across the globe? You can see that most of the infectious events have been recorded in Europe as well as in US. India looks very clean. Is it that there is no disease in India, or the Southeast Asia and majority of the Africa looks clean? This is because we don't have good systems to detect emerging diseases, because things are changing in the recent time. Things are changing, but for past several years, the capacity for detection of infectious diseases in most part of the world is very poor. So that is why wherever you have laboratories, wherever you have capacities to detect, you see a lot of emerging infectious events detected. Because detection is very critical for the control of the disease. If you are not able to detect early, the disease spreads, and only later stage, if you are able to come to know, you cannot take control measures. Just because COVID could be detected early, for example, countries like India got sufficient time for preparation. That is why we were able to take several activities and actions so that the disease spread could be contained for several weeks. From where these infectious diseases are coming from? If you analyze these emerging infectious diseases, you will find that majority, you can see that this white color as well as the red and orange, the major chunk is coming from zoonotic origin or from the animals. So this is the pattern, and increasingly we see an increase in the recent decade, because this is up to 2000. After that also you will see that there is a sustained high numbers. So what is zoonosis? Zoonosis is basically the diseases coming from animals to human. And this zoonosis has not started today. The zoonosis has started the time when our human population started, and we started cohabiting with animals. We were raising animals as domestic animals and using animals for food, etc. So this is nothing new. It is an old issue, but because of our various changes or dynamics, the changes in the dynamics of the interaction, it has become more and more significant in today's time. We will see that with some of the examples. And today we talk about human health, animal health, environmental health. Everything is in separate compartments. But it is time to think about one world, one health. It's a global village. It's because of the travel and other things. So anywhere an emerging disease is a risk for the entire world. That is what we are witnessing now also. We have witnessed this earlier also. We have seen even in the first century or first to 5th century time, the smallpox spreading from several countries, like it's from China to Italy to Iran and then to India. This type of movements, because movement of human people is also associated with the transmission of disease. So this is nothing new. But today we have better movement, better connectivity, so that increases the speed. Earlier, the 2018 to 19 Spanish flu must have taken 6 months to come to another continent, but today the disease can come even on the same day to another continent. So that's the type of connectivity we have, and the type of interaction. So we have the environment, we have the animals, we have the vectors, we have the humans. So this complex interaction is responsible for the transfer of infectious agents from animals to human. And if you wanted to control this, so we need to have control in all these aspects. So that's why we need more of an integrated approach, of a One Health approach for this. Initially, I had shown a graph which showed that India was looking very clean in terms, because we were not detecting cases, or the Southeast Asia was looking very clean because of the detection issues. But if you look at from the risk point of view, risk of zoonotic pathogens coming from wildlife, non-wildlife, vector-borne pathogens, or even drug-resistant organisms, you can see that the most brighter places are India and China, and particularly the Southeast Asia and Central Africa, because these are the most important biodiversity areas. And these are the most fertile, the Southeast Asia, including India, the most fertile part of the world. The maximum population is here. We have a lot of biodiversity, and these are the places for emergence of diseases. So compared to any other part of the world, we are the people should have maximum facility to detect emerging pathogens. We should have much more number of disease surveillance and the laboratory facilities, as well as epidemiological disease surveillance to detect any sort of changes. So if you look at the animals, you can see that in the last few decades, you can see a number of animals have been identified as the source of infection, starting from with Ebola. You have seen Ebola coming from, and we know that it comes from bats and then gets into chimpanzee or other the monkeys, and then it gets into the human. You have seen several bacteria getting more like E. coli O157 coming from cattle to human, hantavirus. We have seen that they are coming from mostly believed that they are coming from palm civets. Influenza, of course, influenza coming from birds and several other animals. And the recent breaches of species barrier gems are, and the SARS coronavirus 2, which we are fighting right now. So these two are believed to be originally coming from the bats, but they have other intermediate hosts to transfer to the human. The MERS coronavirus, we know that the camel plays an important role in transferring the virus to the human. But in case of COVID or coronavirus, SARS coronavirus 2, people believe that pangolin plays some role, but it is not yet fully proven. A pangolin may not be the major host, or maybe some other animals involved, we don't know. But there are indications that pangolins play some role for the transfer from bats to human. So this slide, just shows that the MERS coronavirus, this was a virus with a very high mortality rate of around 40% mortality. Fortunately, it does not attain the capacity to transmit. They don't have they are not efficiently transmitted from human to human. In spite of the virus is here for last 8 years, from 2012, the virus is here, but we don't speak. Virus, we still don't know who all are involved, what is exactly the natural cycle, and how it is transmitted to human. Of course, we know the camel play a role, but several things are still unknown. Even when they are not able to transmit very efficiently, you can see one red peak here. This is which happened in 2018 in Republic of Korea. A single case coming to a hospital, which led to a super spread event and affecting a number of people. But it could be contained because it is not a sustained transmissible disease. But that experience also really helped Korea to contain COVID at the moment. So we do have Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever coming from cattle, and it's a tick-borne viral disease. We know that India also has cases in Gujarat, Rajasthan, etc. But Iran and Pakistan are the major places affected by this disease. These are all just I'm trying to show the examples of how the disease is transmitted from animals to our population. We know about the avian flu, the bird flu. Influenza is primarily a poultry pathogen or a bird pathogen. Several types of influenza. Hundreds of types of influenzas are existing or is there among poultry and other waterfowls and water birds, and they can jump species and come to human. Here left side you can see a picture with a green marking China, the H7N9 type of influenza A. This disease is reported only from China. China has reported a large number of cases. Right now it is some sort of under control, but for several years they have been reporting these cases. Fortunately, the cases are not reported from outside the world for the simple reason that this is also, the virus has not attained a transmission capability. They cannot efficiently transmit from human to human. So human can get infected and they can get very serious infection, but they are not able to transmit easily. So that's why it is limited there. But that is where we compare with COVID or the SARS coronavirus 2. They have capability to transmit easily from human to human. That's why they came out of the original epicenter. We have heard a lot about 2014 Ebola when it hit the West African countries. They never thought that Ebola will come there because Ebola was a sub-Saharan or Central African disease and affecting only a maximum around 200, 300 people. But we have seen a major outbreak extending to several months, more than a year in West Africa, affecting more than 20,000 people. And today we know that Democratic Republic of Congo, the disease is there for very, very long time. For last nearly 2 years, they are struggling with this disease. So Ebola also originally started from the bats and then coming to the chimpanzees and then bushmeat, etc., and finally reaching the human. And then they have the capability to transmit the disease. Coming to the virus, which I have, involved with one of the outbreak investigation, the Nipah virus. The Nipah virus was first came to the notice in 1999 in Malaysia, but it never reappeared in Malaysia. But the Bangladesh is one country which from 2001 till 2019, there were several, almost every year, we have cases of Nipah virus, very highly fatal disease. That is the outbreak which occurred in Kerala, the South India, in 2018, the mortality was 90%. But again, fortunately, this virus also has not acquired the ability to transmit efficiently between human to human. So it is limited. That's why the outbreak gets contained very quickly. But if they acquire such capacity, you can imagine that a 90% mortality, the case fatality virus transmitting like the COVID, you can imagine the scenario. So in Kerala, a number of a very significant number of bats, nearly 20% of the fruit-eating bats were found positive for Nipah virus. Fortunately, bats doesn't come so closer to human, so the transmission chance directly from the bats to human is very, very rare. So that is the good part of it. But several animals can get infected with Nipah. So we need to be very, very careful because this Nipah virus presence is there across Southeast Asia. You can see that India, Southeast Asia, Australia, and several parts of Africa, we have the bats which are capable of transmitting or harboring Nipah virus is present or Nipah-like virus is present. So it's important to be prepared for these things. One of the disease which was first discovered in 1957 in Karnataka was Kaisnur forest disease, or it's called as monkey fever. So this disease was discovered in Shimoga districts of Karnataka in 1957. Then it was thought to be a disease present only in Karnataka. It's a tick-borne viral disease. But in 2014, when our laboratory, we started looking for this virus, we quickly found that the disease is not just limited to one district or a few districts of Karnataka, because it was not only in few districts of Karnataka, but today we have documented that this disease is there in 5 states of India along the Western Ghat. So this again shows the importance of laboratory detection and surveillance. And of course, the KFD or monkey fever virus doesn't transmit from human to human. They don't have the capability to transmit to human to human. The virus comes through tick-borne disease. So They come via tick infection or infected bite of the tick. But we have to be careful with this type of organisms because they also have a high mortality. It can go up to around 10% mortality. And so if they acquire any characteristics, then it will be difficult. Coming down to the current scenario, that is the COVID-19 or caused by a coronavirus similar to SARS, called as the SARS coronavirus 2. So it was in the month of December, the China noticed there is a clustering of pneumonia. So how did they notice? Because they had a surveillance system. So a strong surveillance system is required to detect, and that should be connected with a strong laboratory network. So in 2003, China took 6 months to identify the SARS virus. And it took several months to understand that there is something important is happening and to report to the world. By that time, the disease has transmitted to several countries, including after that only the international health regulation has been put in forward by the WHO so that countries detect and report fast, quicker, so that the disease doesn't transmit to other countries, or the other countries can take appropriate precautions. So after 2003, and their surveillance and detection capabilities has increased. So we can really see that the number of avian influenza viruses they are capable of detecting, that itself shows their capability in surveillance and detection. So because of the surveillance, they identified the pneumonia clusters, and then very quickly with modern technologies like next generation sequencing, etc., they have easily identified the virus, and so the sequence was shared, the virus was cultured, and very quickly the sequence was shared, so that helped many countries and the world to prepare diagnostic assays. So without diagnostic assays, you cannot identify who is infected, who is not infected. So the testing. So even then, it took a long time for many countries to scale up the availability of test kits and testing. So these are lessons which we have to be learning, because the countries have to be prepared. We have to be prepared. If you get a sequence, why should we take more than a few days to make a test and scale it up? We should have capacities. We definitely have capacities, but we have to have plans for that. So you can see the progression. From 31st December, WHO was informed of a new disease, and by 12th of January, the genome is shared. By 7th of January, the virus is identified, and we are just in May. And you can imagine that more than 60 lakhs people have been infected by this virus, and it killed 3.6 lakhs people, and a number of people even in India. So the initial clues were that the virus came, there was an exposure at Henan seafood market in Wuhan city, but still a lot of work is going on. We still don't know how the virus, whether it has come from the Hunan market, or it was already there for some time in the community, because one of the paper published in Lancet, one of the first paper, it identifies one case even December 1st. So that means that there may be cases already there in the community for some time from November. And also today we know that France has identified some case in December itself, retrospective analysis. So this just shows that how dangerous these pathogens are, and how important we should have system to detect as early as possible. Because early you detect, you can contain, you can avoid, you can limit its spread to other countries. Today, this virus has taken the whole world into a hostage. So we have we have seen the number of cases. You can see that when it started, it was China was looking red, and today you can see the entire world is looking red. So again, these are the reported numbers. We really don't know whether this is the real numbers, because only when you test and tested case only we report it as a positive case. So and it is the very beginning of the pandemic. Pandemic has just started. Pandemic may have several waves. It may linger here for several years, a few years, because we don't have any vaccine or a treatment at this moment. Even if a vaccine or a treatment becomes available sooner or later this year or next year, then it will need to be scaled up. It needs to be produced in bulk, and we should have logistics and supply chains in place to make it reach the poor people or the public. Because we have, even if vaccine comes, even if a single dose vaccine, we need 8 billion doses. If it is a 2-dose vaccine, we need 16 billion doses. So these are huge numbers for the production and manufacturing. So there are a lot of work is going on vaccine, but it might take time. So just to summarize some of these important things which we have told, that the population, urbanization, and international travel, the interaction between the human-animal interaction, etc., are encouraging these diseases to get into the human and to get transmitted so quickly. Of course, not to mention the climate change, what all changes are going to come in organisms. Even we have seen some places when virulence of the organism may be changing with a change in temperature, ecology. So it's very, very important for us to have sustained development and etc. for controlling this type of calamities. So we also have seen the livestock, and poultry is playing a major role in transmitting many viral diseases, particularly the influenza and exotic animal trade. So the pangolin is an example of exotic animal trades. They have infected, so they can easily they can transmit disease because of the trade and our eating habits, some of the cultural issues like live animal markets or wet animal markets, ecological disruptions. Wherever the development happens, you interrupt, you disrupt, you encroach to the nature. So it can also cause infections. So these are some of the pictures which we have already explained. The bushmeat trade, logging, agricultural encroachment, wildlife habitat loss, etc., all causing issues, and human livestock, wildlife interaction, wet markets. So global commerce in livestock products, increased demand for animal protein, an ecosystem degradation. These are all increasing the opportunity for human-animal interaction. So how to avoid this catastrophe? The best way is to reduce unprotected exposure to human-animal interface. So unprotected exposure to human-animal interface. We cannot avoid human-animal interface. Hygiene at all levels, individual level hygiene, which can, the hygiene is put in place, and not only COVID, a number of other diseases, you can reduce the incidence, you can reduce the morbidity. At individual level, at societal level, at the markets and hotels and every place, and real-time disease surveillance. We should have, we have several technologies also in hand, including artificial intelligence. We should put all those technologies, including human resources, to have real-time disease surveillance. Not after 6 months to know what is happening. We need to know what is happening today, like whatever the climate monitoring. So what is the temperature, what is the particle levels, etc. Similarly, and for facilities for rapid detection. The Southeast Asia particularly has a lot of population density is very high. We need to have number of laboratories and network of laboratories which are capable of detecting, even though lower level laboratory is not able to detect everything. If they are able to rule out some of the common things, and then if it is not diagnosed, that can be scaled up. And public health preparedness at all levels, individual levels, at infrastructure levels, and country levels. And you need a lot of funding for public health preparedness. I hope this outbreak, the amount of economic loss each country is suffering will justify investment in public health, which will be very, very, an iota of, the loss is sufficient to prevent that loss by strengthening the public health. So the transmission today we are talking about, everybody is interested in how to prevent the COVID transmission. So, each disease, it varies. For example, the transmission. So when the person is very close to the infected person, the transmission chances are very high if they are unprotected. So the major transmission is through the droplets. The droplet transmission occurs within 1 meter distance when a person, coming so close without protection. Fomites, fomites also the inanimate objects where the droplets can rest and then it can transmit. But major route of transmission in case of COVID is droplet, whereas in Ebola, it is contact, body fluid contact. Some diseases like measles, etc., it is aerosol. So you can, even you are very far, you can get infected in case of aerosol. In case of COVID, aerosol plays a very minimal role in transmission, that is only very closed rooms, whereas the major chunk of transmission is droplet. That is where wearing a mask can, help in reducing the transmission, because basically when you wear a mask, if you are infected, you will not infect another person because the droplet movement can be prevented. That's why even a cloth mask can do definitely reduce the transmission. So this is again explaining aerosol is far distance. Fomite is by holding phone and several railings of the bus and steps, staircase, etc. And these are the bigger droplets. They fall off, and these are the bigger droplets as the major route of transmission of COVID and also even influenza. They both get transmitted the same way. So the way the virus enters, it is again same for influenza or COVID. It enters through your nose, it enters through your mouth, it can enter through your eyes, and it comes via, you can touch your fingers on contaminated surfaces, and you can take through the hand to lips or your mouth, nose, or eyes. So you need to protect those areas. That's why the personal protective equipment. So you need to know that how it is transmitted, and those areas, if you block it and use hand washing, soap and water, and also using alcohol rub, you can block, you can cut off the transmission, because social distancing or the physical distancing is important, but several occasions you may not be able to maintain that social or physical distancing. So those places, using a cloth mask, etc., can really help to reduce the exposure risk. This is Ebola is a very, very transmissible disease. People have innovated by using a cube. It's a plastic cube which can be made negative pressure. So you can set up these things even in outdoor, and you can manage cases. So these type of innovations are very important, because we need to bring this type of case management system to the lower level of our hospital systems, so that people don't need to transport or move to a higher centers, and you get much more space, much more institutions getting involved for taking care of the patients. The virus is going to stay here, the COVID, the SARS coronavirus 2 is going to stay here for some time. We are going to have more infections coming in. But our intention should be to reduce the agony to the people, to reduce the mortality. And to reduce the mortality, you need to have better your early detection system and case management. Appropriate cases needs the cases needs hospitalization should be identified by triaging, and they need to get early care. By providing supportive care itself, we can significantly reduce mortality, even though we don't have any specific drug available at this point of time. So to conclude, infectious disease will continue to emerge and re-emerge and spread. Human-induced environmental changes, interspecies contacts, altered social conditions, demography, medical technology affects microbes opportunities. Now, microbes get a lot of opportunities because of our developmental thing. So that is, it is not now, it is there from the very beginning of the humanity. There is diseases are also part of it. So we need to learn to live with it and be prepared to face the challenge. We cannot afford a virus or a bacteria or a fungus to take the whole world into a hostage. So we need to have preparations. We need to be really prepared to detect these invaders. Not only we need to have armed forces in the borders, we need to have a different type of armed forces or disease detectives throughout the country at every point, because every human being may be harboring some organisms, or animals may be harboring organisms, and that can lead to. Today, China is the origin of, believed to be the origin of this disease, but we don't know whether a disease can originate from India. We have all possibilities, like the biodiversity and the type of organisms we have. It can happen from here too. So we need to be really prepared to identify those. So with those words, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Arun Kumar.
I hope it was audible.
Yes, it was audible, and I think it was very much informative also. And since the entire FDP was on the theme of epidemics, and then especially pre and post, and the current crisis of corona, and how we are going to live with the corona. Are we going to have any medicine in the future? So there was like something in the mind of everybody. So we thought that we have to plan a FDP and faculty development program where we can invite various university colleagues and government college and faculties. So since the educational institutes are the best way to spread the information to the community, and I hope that our participants must have benefited well. So, Dr. Ansu, if you can put some questions in this chat box.
What are you saying, Dr. Sumesh? Sorry, I missed.
Yes, if you can read and ask some questions in the chat box, you can ask.
Okay, just a minute. Dr. Sumit, I did not find any question in the question and answer box.
So,
is there any in the chat?
Okay, let me check it. So the floor is open for any type of questions if anybody want to ask.
So Anshu, can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am, please.
Yes, ma'am. Sure, ma'am. Please.
So thank you so much, Dr. Arun. It was a wonderful lecture. I just have one query, because while you were telling about the different types of the, Nipah and some other like Cassiner. So these were the diseases where you told that although the mortality rate is very high, but these are not transmitted from human to human. So since many of the viruses, as we find, have the capability of mutating, so is there any possibility that due to mutation they can even jump to humans in future?
Yeah, yes, that is what is we are worried about. Any of these high mortality diseases like bird flu, Nipah, they are definitely able to cause infection in human. But an infected human is not able to give it to another person easily, because most of these virus infects the lower respiratory tract, not on the upper respiratory tract. If they are capable of highly multiplying in your nasopharynx, you are able to give it to others very easily. Unfortunately, these have still adapted to the lower respiratory. If they change a slight change in their receptor adaptation, it becomes possible to transmit very, very efficiently. So for that, we need to really watching these viruses, and these people should be studying these things, because any change should be identified early, and so that we can put things into practice, and also start work on vaccines. Because see, for example, Nipah, we know Nipah for 20 years. We don't have a vaccine for Nipah because the whole Nipah had killed only around, or Nipah has affected only around 600, 700 people, because they are limited transmission. So if we are waiting for a time to this virus to transmit to 1 million people and then look for vaccine, it's not going to come immediately. So 20 years we are not able to, because nobody will invest, because no company will be interested in this type of things. That is where the countries has to identify, WHO and all has to identify and invest. Now there is an organization called as CEPI, Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation. So they are also putting some efforts in developing vaccines, at least vaccine platforms, so that we can immediately. That's why the COVID vaccine development is also going a little faster. Because some of the, first SARS virus, it never reappeared. So some vaccine work started, but they could never check it because there was it never came back. So these are important for academic as well as research institution to get involved. And also looking at other non-pharmaceutical interventions like hand washing and hand washing it takes a lot of water. So now we need the people, water conservation people are so worried. Okay. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes.
So, Professor Arun, what I can understand in the last 1.5 years of my studies, or like I am doing a review of literature on the diseases and bats, One Health program is one of the best solutions where biologists, ecologists, virologists, epidemiologists, community medicine experts can rope in and work on a similar theme, because we all are having a specific field of knowledge, and one knowledge cannot be transmitted into another knowledge in a very short notice. And during the literature that Nipah has been detected in few bats in Chandigarh way back in some early 90s. And after that, there has been no outbreak in few areas of Haryana. So, though we are Delhi, and even like some of our participants are also from the Haryana, but we are not having any incident of Nipah in Haryana, though this happened in Kerala. So the outbreak can happen anywhere, and bats are one of the reservoir of many viruses which are yet to be identified. So such type of programs, government have to invest in some like money before any outbreak occurs, because after that we can only try to manage it. But if we
Correct.
early detection, then that will be the best policy to at least save the life and economy.
Absolutely.
So thanks, Professor Arun.
Thank you.
Sorry to
Dr. Sumit, there are few questions in the
Yes. Please put on.
There are many questions in
Dr.
chat
Sumit, you
box.
can ask. There are a few questions.
I am unable to find where, because
So, sir, there is one question. How will see the relation between illicit wildlife trade and spread of zoonotic viruses?
That is a concern, because many of these wildlife could be harboring exotic organisms, and when wildlife trade, many of them are illegal.
busy in another program right now. So I hope I am.
Sumit, please mute yourself. Sumit.
So, because this wildlife trade is many times it illegal, so
No.
it
That
harms.
is about to close. I am just closing it. So I don't think I have missed something.
Dr. Sumit, please mute yourself.